We will continue to fight for these two demands: a plan to balance the budget to lower interest rates and inflation, and no new carbon tax hikes. And if the government does not meet these demands, we will use all procedural tools at our disposal to block the budget from passing.
And now he's standing against all the measures that will help in the budget, proposing instead to cut programs and leave Canadians on their own.
Threats from the official opposition today to hold up the government's 2023 budget. Conservatives tabled more than 900 amendments, that's right, 900, to the bill to jam up debate until their demands were met. But the Speaker tossed about 200 of the amendments and grouped the rest into 4 block votes. So the tactic didn't quite work. How will Canadians see this move? The Power Panel is with me for one last round. Rob Russo, Brad Levine, Lisa Raitt, and Michelle Cadario. Brad, normally you see a filibuster for something that is like really controversial or overreaching, but a budget with a deficit and a carbon tax that's been going on for about 8 years now. I mean, what do you make of that play?
It's these are tactics. The Conservatives don't have much in terms of tools in the toolkit. They have procedure which they can use, and you set the frame up there, and you can almost see. And I don't want a federal election in the near term, so please don't. But you can see some of the language here tee up what the debate will be when the next federal election comes, likely well over a year and a half from now. This gives Poilievre an opportunity to talk about balanced budgets and carbon tax. Two of the things that he wants to run on in the next campaign, and gives Trudeau an opportunity to talk about all the good things for people that he sees in this budget that the confidence and supply agreement is with the NDP is leading to. So it sets it up very, very nicely. It's likely going to be, I think, a speed bump as opposed to a stoppage of the budget. It'll go through because the majority of members of Parliament will vote for the Budget Implementation Act when we get to it. So I just see it as it's a bit of a tactic, but it gives him communications opportunity to talk about the things that he wants to talk about, and we'll see if there's appetite right now. I think over the pandemic, I don't think a lot of Canadians were in favor of balanced budgets or necessarily getting to balanced budgets real quick like they did maybe back in those earlier clips that you showed of Mark Holland and Pierre Poilievre in 2007. But there might be an appetite, and maybe he's seeding the ground for setting up what he wants to talk about in the upcoming federal election.
The suits were not tailored as tight in this clip. It's just how much fashion has changed.
That dated the video, yeah.
But Lisa, I wonder, like, they're really focusing on the carbon tax, they're focusing on carbon pricing, the clean fuel standard coming into effect.
Yes.
On a day when wildfires are hitting this country like we've never seen, people are talking about the impacts of climate change, and here in Ottawa, the sky is a gross orange because of smoke haze from thousands of kilometers away. I mean, what are the optics of that, do you think?
Well, I think these are opposition tactics, as Brad pointed out. I would remind everyone, by the way, which MP holds the record for the longest speech ever given in the House of Commons? Pierre Poilievre. He went on for 4 days in the middle of the SNC-Lavalin scandal. And we should know now that this is a tactic that he likes to use. So to your question at the very beginning, which is a fair question, I think that for those who care about the increase in the carbon tax that's coming, and those who care about balanced budgets, which are two bailiwicks of the Conservative Party, they are going to enjoy this, and they're going to like that. And other people will say, well, look, this is all happening because of climate change, and how dare you talk about carbon tax and balanced budget in this kind of time. So both sides are going to have a lot of things to beat each other up on. But the notion that we're having this kind of filibuster should not be a surprise. This is something that the Conservatives really do enjoy.
Michelle, does this matter, or is it just parliamentary noise?
I think for the most part it's parliamentary noise, but the basis of it, though, is probably it could very well be the ballot box question of the next election campaign. You know, the joy of being in opposition is that you get to promise the moon, and a few stars to boot. So, I'm going to balance your budget. I'm going to, while taking away some of those increases in taxes, and your inflation's going to come down all told. And in the election, he'll have to flush that out. Meanwhile, taking the environment seriously and spending on matters where appropriate, making the investments in healthcare, the child tax benefit, are things that the Liberals are going to be running on. So, I think it's just, they're kind of in their starting positions for a long race towards the election campaign, and starting to figure out what messaging works and what messaging doesn't. And getting a few headlines along the way as they pull out every procedural trick that an opposition members are allowed to do.
Rob, it's an interesting confluence of political timing, right? That the clean fuel standard comes in as the carbon price rises while cost of living has gone up. From when it was implemented in the early days of Trudeau, when interest rates and inflation were low and stable, it changes the whole political dynamic at play around that one particular issue.
Yeah, and I don't see this just as something that they're road testing for a general election. There are a bunch of by-elections happening in a couple of weeks. And I think that this is a message that is probably going to resonate with more people going to the polls than the Chinese interference in our democracy. I was actually struck by how questioner after questioner on the Conservative bench at the beginning of question period stuck to the economic theme. And it came after several weeks of domination by Chinese interference. And it comes just before the Bank of Canada may raise interest rates, and we may see a little bit more bite out of what's going on with the economy. And it also comes after a poll suggested that, a Leger poll, which was quite interesting, suggested that if there was an election today, we would have a standstill result. So perhaps people in the Conservative research offices have determined that we better start getting another message going out there, one that might connect with people's pocketbooks, and those are issues that people do tend to cast ballots on.
Well, Brad, it's interesting to Rob's point that when the polls were pretty consistently showing a 4 or 5 point Conservative lead, it's when they were laser focused on affordability and the economy and cost of living, and it petered out a little bit when they started deviating into other issues and had less of a clarion message.
Yeah, there's no question cost of living is a huge issue, and it's another reason why they're on it. Those are good, safe, conservative issues, balancing the budget and lowering taxes. So it's on brand for Poilievre and the Conservatives. And we just saw this in the Alberta election, that the cost of living, getting through your monthly bills, being able to afford a home, being able to afford rent, groceries, those were all top of mind issues. Rachel Notley was trying to get things like health care. To a certain extent, that worked in certain parts, but overall, we saw cost of living. So for these upcoming by-elections and for the foreseeable future, particularly if, I think it's Wednesday, the Bank of Canada is going to report out whether it's going to raise interest rates again. So these are not going away anytime soon. And it's harder to take, climate change is top of mind. Everyone's talking about wildfires. West Coast, Alberta, BC, Nova Scotia. Here in Toronto, we've got smoke. Ottawa, you've got smoke. These are huge issues going. But I think it's harder to draw the parallel between carbon pricing and these wildfires than it is to say, I'm going to lower your taxes, you'll have more money in your wallet. So I think it's an easier argument for the Conservatives to make than it is for those who want to see the climate change issue addressed.
Yeah, Lisa, there is a bit of a dissonance there, right? Alberta just went through an absolutely horrendous wildfire season. And Danielle Smith, one of her first positions, she said after re-election was no to an emissions cap, right? Like there is a connection between these things, but it just seems hard to draw sometimes politically when other issues get in the way of it.
Well, and not to say that the Liberal government is attempting to draw those two things together, because they are. I mean, the very first line from Minister Wilkinson when he was addressing the Halifax wildfires was that climate change has caused this to happen. And they're driving home their message on one side. The Conservatives will drive home their message. The Conservatives now have decided to go back to the fiscal anchor of balanced budgets, which I find very interesting because it's simple, it's clear, people understand it, and that puts the Liberals in a position of having to talk about why spending is good. And it feels like we're back to 2015 again, but we'll have to see.
But Michelle, I guess it's not just a message to say climate change is a big part of this, right? There's a pretty strong scientific consensus on it. You have the dry underbrush, you have the warming of the planet. I mean, at some point, when do people start voting? I guess in a big way on this stuff.
Well, I would say that they already have, and I think that if you look at the suburbs of Toronto, suburbs of Vancouver, in the last election campaign, the Liberals won those seats, many of those seats, because the Conservatives failed to have a message on going after climate change, and have a strong environmental message at all. They flip-flopped and they had, a whole bunch of different ideas that they were putting forward. But in the end, they regressed, and I think that actually did. I think that actually was a message there. I'm up in northwestern Ontario. Let me tell you, people are talking about the fire season, and they're worried about climate change, and they're worried about how our forests are changing and what's going to happen up here. So I think it's a discussion that's happening in a whole lot of households across the country. Lisa's right. The link isn't necessarily made to the carbon tax all the time, but certainly an action on the environment and action against climate change, I think is something that the voters are demanding.
Okay, meanwhile, the filibuster continues. The Conservatives have moved another motion to adjourn the House, and the vote is coming up in about 16 minutes. So stay tuned for that. I want to thank the Power Panel, Rob Rousseau, Brad Levine, Lisa Raitt, Michelle Cadario. Thanks so much, gang.
Thanks, David.